It was just another brisk morning in New York City. The streets were buzzing with the usual rhythm of commuters rushing to work, tourists snapping photos, and street vendors calling out to passers-by. But in the middle of all this, something entirely unexpected was about to happen. Donald Trump, the former president, walked down Fifth Avenue in a gray suit that caught the light, looking like he was on his way to another business meeting, surrounded by his usual entourage. But this morning, something was different. He wasn't heading to a press conference or boardroom. No, this morning, he was heading somewhere that would surprise everyone, including himself. As he approached the corner of the street near Central Park, he saw him, Marcus, a homeless man sitting on the sidewalk. At first glance, Marcus looked like just another face in the crowd, his disheveled clothes, dirty beard, and tired eyes blending in with the city's chaos. But something caught Trump's eye. Maybe it was the way Marcus looked up at him, as if expecting something. Maybe it was the vulnerability in his gaze that reminded Trump of something he once felt, a long time ago, before everything changed. Trump stopped, almost as if in slow motion. His bodyguards, used to his fast-paced stride, hesitated for a moment before taking a few steps back. They knew better than to question their boss, especially when he made an unplanned decision. Marcus watched Trump approach, his face unreadable. The streets around them seemed to go quiet for a moment, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something extraordinary to happen. Trump didn't say anything at first. He simply stood there for a beat longer than anyone expected, staring down at Marcus. Then, without warning, he spoke. "You doing okay?" Trump's voice was calm, almost casual, but there was something genuine in the way he asked. It wasn't the usual political rhetoric or a soundbite for the cameras. This was just a man talking to another man. Marcus blinked, taken off guard. Most people who walked by didn't even glance at him, let alone stop and ask if he was okay. He hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond to the unexpected question from one of the most famous people in the world. "Well, I guess I'm making it," Marcus finally said, shrugging his shoulders. His voice was rough, but there was a quiet dignity in it. "You know, day by day. Just trying to survive." Trump nodded, his expression thoughtful. He looked around at the busy street, people walking by, oblivious to the interaction, lost in their own world, and then back down at Marcus. There was a long silence. "You've had a rough go, haven't you?" Trump said, his tone softening. It was a simple observation, but it cut through the noise of the city like a knife. Marcus was silent for a moment, the weight of Trump's words sinking in. He nodded slowly, not quite sure what to say next. His life had been hard. Long years of struggling, losing everything he'd once had. The streets were unforgiving, and hope seemed like a distant memory. But there was something different about this conversation. It felt real, unlike the hollow charity he had seen from others before. Trump leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to a more private tone. "Tell you what," he said, "I'm gonna help you. Not just a handout. Something different. I don't know what yet, but I'll figure it out." Marcus blinked in disbelief. You want to help me?" Trump smiled, the familiar confidence he was known for creeping into his expression. "Yes, I know a thing or two about turning things around. You don't have to stay here forever." Marcus didn't know how to react. Was this some kind of prank? Was he being filmed for a hidden camera show? He looked up at Trump's face, searching for any sign that this was a joke. But there was nothing. Trump's eyes were steady, his words sincere. "Why?" Marcus finally asked. "Why would you want to help me?" Trump looked down, pausing for a moment. "Because everyone deserves a shot, and I think you're worth it." The words hung in the air for a long time. It wasn't what Marcus expected, but for some reason, he believed Trump. Maybe it was the way Trump spoke, or maybe it was just the glimmer of hope that had been absent from his life for so long. Whatever it was, Marcus felt something stir within him, a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in years. Trump stood back, his usual confidence returning. "I'll be in touch," he said, and without another word, he turned to walk away, leaving Marcus to process what had just happened. But before Trump could get far, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I'll make sure of it." And with that, the brief, unexpected encounter ended. Trump disappeared into the crowd, leaving Marcus sitting there on the sidewalk, staring after him, trying to make sense of it all. What had just happened? Why had Trump stopped? And more importantly, what would come of it? One thing was certain. Marcus's life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. Marcus sat on the cold sidewalk, his hands clenched tightly around the cup he held, but his mind was elsewhere. The noise of New York City, honking cars, chatter, footsteps, and the occasional street musician seemed to fade into the background as his thoughts traveled back to a time when his life was different, when he wasn't just a man sitting on the streets, invisible to most. He remembered the first time he'd stepped into the world as an adult, eager to make his mark. He was 21 then, filled with ambition and dreams. Growing up in Brooklyn, Marcus had always admired the energy of the city. It was a place where people came to make something of themselves, to climb, to succeed. His family had been struggling, but his mother had always made sure he knew he had potential. "You can do anything you set your mind to," she'd always say, her words echoing in his mind. After high school, Marcus worked his way into a promising sales position at a marketing firm. He was smart, ambitious, and driven, just as his mother had believed. In those early days, life was filled with possibilities. He rented his first small apartment, bought his first car, and had a girlfriend, Lisa, who he thought was the one. They had plans, big plans. They'd go on trips, settle down in a bigger place, build a life. But the life he dreamed of began to unravel quickly. First came the layoffs. The company had been cutting back, and Marcus, despite his best efforts, found himself without a job. His savings quickly dwindled, and soon, he couldn't afford the rent on his apartment. The bank repossessed his car. Lisa, unable to handle the pressure of their financial difficulties, left him. The apartment that once felt like a symbol of his success now seemed like a reminder of everything he'd lost. The spiral started slowly at first, but as the months passed, it gained momentum. He moved into smaller, cheaper places. He borrowed from friends, then lost touch with them when he couldn't pay it back. The longer it went on, the harder it was to ask for help. He felt humiliated, ashamed. One night, after too many drinks to numb the pain, he walked out of the bar and straight into the streets. The cold air hit him like a slap in the face, and the reality of what had happened set in. He had nothing left. No family, no friends, no job, and soon, no home. At first, he tried to fight it. He applied for jobs, searched for places to stay, but each rejection, each door slammed in his face, only made it worse. Slowly, he became just another figure on the streets of New York, unseen by most, ignored by others. He took up a spot on a corner near a subway entrance, where the foot traffic was constant, and where the occasional passerby might throw him some change or a half-eaten sandwich. It was a life of survival. He learned to stretch the little he had, to avoid trouble, to blend in. But the longer he lived like this, the harder it became to remember the person he had once been. The ambitious, confident young man with dreams of making a difference. As Marcus sat there now, his thoughts were interrupted by the sounds of the street. A young woman walked by, her eyes catching his for a moment. She gave him a small, sympathetic smile, but kept walking, like so many others. A few people glanced at him, then looked away quickly, embarrassed by the discomfort he caused. But today was different. Today, something had happened that he hadn't expected. He had spoken to Donald Trump, of all people. The former president, a figure who seemed so far removed from his world, had stopped, looked at him, and spoken to him as if he was just another man on the street. Trump hadn't dismissed him or ignored him. He'd offered help, a lifeline of sorts. It didn't make sense. Why would Trump, someone with everything he could ever want, take an interest in someone like Marcus? He had no answers, but the brief conversation had sparked something inside him, a flicker of hope, something he hadn't felt in years. As Marcus sat there, the weight of that conversation settled deeper into his thoughts. He tried to push it out of his mind, to focus on the present. There were things to do. There were places to go. He needed to keep moving forward. But the question lingered. What if this was the break he needed? What if this was his chance to turn everything around? The thought was almost too much to believe. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a future. a future that might not be defined by the streets. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the usual noise of the city. Cars honking, people shouting across the streets, and the hustle of the daily grind. But today, his mind was far from the usual thoughts of survival. He kept replaying the events of yesterday in his head, wondering if it had all been some kind of dream. Donald Trump, of all the people in the world, why would he stop? Why would someone with so much wealth and power, someone so far removed from Marcus's reality, offer to help him? The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. Maybe it had been some kind of publicity stunt. Maybe Trump had seen him as just another broken man to fix for the cameras. But then again, Marcus hadn't seen any cameras. It had been genuine, or at least, it seemed that way. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it. He didn't want to get his hopes up. In the years that he had been living on the streets, he had learned the hard way not to trust anyone. People had promised help before, only to disappear or offer empty words. He couldn't count how many times he'd been told he'd be given a second chance, only to end up right back where he started. But something about Trump's words lingered. "I'll make sure of it." Those words echoed in his mind as he dragged himself out of his makeshift bed. A thin blanket spread over him beneath the park bench. The cold morning air bit at his skin as he stood up, stretching stiffly. His body ached, but it wasn't the physical pain that occupied his thoughts. It was the possibility of change. He had nothing to lose. That much was clear. He had no home, no job, no family to speak of. So what if this was it? What if this was his shot at something more? The thought was almost laughable, but it was also a little bit exciting. A part of him, buried deep down, wanted to believe that there could be more to his life than what he had right now. A part of him wanted to see if there was a way out. Marcus made his way to the corner where he usually sat, hoping for some spare change or food. He didn't know why, but today felt different. As he settled down on the curb, he glanced at his watch, a cheap knockoff he'd bought off a street vendor months ago. He had no idea when exactly Trump had said he'd be in touch, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen today. The hours passed, and with each person who walked by, Marcus felt a mixture of hope and doubt. What if Trump had just been saying things to make him feel better? What if he forgot about him already? The city never stopped, and he was just another face in the crowd. But then, just as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, a black SUV pulled up beside him. The car came to a smooth stop, and for a moment, Marcus thought it was just another tourist, stopping to take pictures of the city. But when the back door opened and a well-dressed man stepped out, Marcus's heart skipped a beat. It was one of Trump's bodyguards. Marcus stood up quickly, his pulse racing. "What's going on? Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaky. The man smiled, stepping toward him. "Mr. Trump sent me. He wants to see you." Marcus blinked in disbelief. He wants to see me?" The bodyguard nodded. "Yes. He asked me to bring you to his office. It's time to talk." Marcus's mind raced. This couldn't be real, could it? Was this some kind of joke? But the man's expression was serious. The moment of hesitation only lasted a split second before Marcus made up his mind. This was his chance. This was it. "Okay," Marcus said, barely able to keep the words steady. He followed the bodyguard to the SUV, his heart pounding. This wasn't just a second chance. This was a chance for a new beginning. Or so he hoped. The drive was quiet, and Marcus couldn't help but stare out the window at the city passing by. The streets he'd walked every day now seemed so distant, almost like a different life. He tried to calm his nerves, but there was something about this moment that made him feel like everything was about to change. They arrived at a sleek, modern building near the center of Manhattan. The bodyguard led him through the lobby and up to an office on the top floor. The moment they stepped inside, Marcus was greeted by the sharp, sterile feel of the space. Glass walls, polished floors, and minimalist decor. And then he saw Trump. The former president stood by his desk, looking as confident and powerful as ever. But there was something different about him now, something less distant, less guarded. Trump gave Marcus a warm, but businesslike smile. "Marcus," Trump said, offering his hand. "Glad you could make it." Marcus hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand, his mind spinning. I didn't expect this. I mean, I didn't think you'd actually. Trump held up his hand to stop him. Don't worry about that. I meant what I said. I want to help, but we've got work to do. We're going to turn your life around. Marcus nodded, still struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. This was happening, and now he had to figure out what to do with this strange, unexpected opportunity. It was the beginning of something new. But what kind of man would he become? Could he trust this offer? Was it really the chance he'd been waiting for? Or was this just another empty promise? The answers weren't clear yet, but Marcus had a choice to make. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Marcus. The moment he stepped into Trump's office, his life had taken an unexpected turn. Trump didn't waste any time. He was a man of action, and he made it clear that he had a plan in mind for Marcus, a plan that would help him reclaim everything he'd lost. But what exactly did that plan entail? Trump's office was sleek, a space that screamed power and success. As Marcus sat across from him, he couldn't help but feel both awe and skepticism. This was the man who had been at the helm of the country, a billionaire real estate mogul, and now, somehow, he was sitting in front of Marcus, offering him a hand up from the street. "You've got potential, Marcus," Trump began, his voice confident, but not without a certain warmth. "I see it. I've built businesses from the ground up, and I know when someone has what it takes. You've got that spark in you, even if you can't see it yet." Marcus sat there, unsure whether he should be flattered or suspicious. He had heard promises like this before. People told him he had potential when he was young, too. But here he was, still stuck on the streets, with nothing to show for it. But this was different. This wasn't some random person offering empty words. This was Donald Trump. "We're going to start small," Trump continued. "I've arranged for you to stay in one of my properties, a place where you can get back on your feet. No more cold nights on the street. From there, we'll see what you can do. I'll set you up with a few opportunities to work with my team." Marcus felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. This wasn't just about a handout. Trump was offering him a real chance to change his life. He had the resources, the connections, and the power to make things happen. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he wasn't alone in this struggle. Still, there was a nagging doubt in the back of his mind. Why him? Out of all the people who needed help, why was Trump choosing to focus on him? Was this some kind of publicity stunt? Or was it genuine? "Why me?" Marcus finally asked, his voice low. "There are plenty of people who need help. Why pick me?" Trump leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because I see something in you. I see the potential to turn things around, not just for you, but for others, too. You're going to be part of something bigger than yourself. This is about more than just getting you off the streets. It's about showing people that change is possible." Marcus nodded, unsure of how to process it all. His life had been nothing but a series of failures and setbacks, but now there was an opportunity in front of him that he couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, a future where he wasn't defined by his past. The next few days flew by in a blur. Trump had arranged for Marcus to stay in a luxury apartment in downtown Manhattan. It wasn't the kind of place he ever thought he'd see from the inside. Marble floors, glass walls with a stunning view of the city skyline. This wasn't just a step up from the streets. This was an entirely new world. But the apartment didn't feel like home, not yet. Marcus wasn't used to the quiet, the comfort. He was used to the noise of the city, the hustle of the street. The silence felt foreign. He spent hours staring out of the window, trying to come to terms with what was happening. The weight of the decision Trump had made for him settled heavily on his shoulders. He was in a new environment, with new people, new expectations. He wasn't just some homeless guy anymore. He had a chance to prove himself, to do something with his life. But he wasn't sure where to start. That's when the calls started coming in. Trump's team had already lined up a series of meetings for Marcus to start getting back into the workforce. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. He was being introduced to business owners, people who might be able to give him work. He had to clean up, put on a suit, and play the part of someone who belonged in this world, a world he had never thought he'd be part of. The first meeting was with a man named Greg, who owned a local construction company. Greg wasn't the type to buy into sob stories or give out charity. He was practical, blunt, and to the point. "So, Marcus," Greg said, looking him up and down. Trump says you've got potential. Let's see it. I've got a job for you. Work on a few projects. It's manual labor, but if you can handle it, I might be able to move you up. The pay's decent, but it's not a luxury lifestyle. Understand? Marcus nodded. This was it. This was the start of something new, something real. Yeah, I understand, he said, the words coming out more firmly than he expected. Greg handed him a clipboard with details about the job. You start tomorrow morning. Be here on time, and show me what you can do. That night, Marcus lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, and his thoughts ran wild. He was scared. This was his chance, but what if he messed it up? What if he couldn't hack it? What if, after all this, he ended up right back where he started? But then he remembered Trump's words, I see something in you. The morning came too quickly for Marcus. He woke up to the blaring alarm on his phone, the sound harsh in the silence of the luxury apartment. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then reality set in. He was no longer on the streets. He wasn't in a shelter or under a bridge. He was in a high-rise apartment in one of the wealthiest cities in the world. And today, he had to prove he belonged here. He rushed to the bathroom, taking a quick shower. The warm water was a luxury he hadn't had in years. As the steam filled the small space, he thought about the day ahead. His first real job interview in years. The construction job was as far from glamorous as he could get, but it was an opportunity. It was a chance to show that he could work, that he wasn't just another person thrown away by society. He dressed in the best clothes he had, a simple button-up shirt and a pair of slacks Trump's team had provided. It wasn't a suit, but it was something he could wear to show he was trying. After a quick breakfast, he left the apartment and headed out into the city. When he arrived at the construction site, he immediately felt out of place. The workers were busy, dressed in their work clothes, and talking in a language of their own. Jokes, grunts, and fast chatter. Marcus stood at the edge of the site, unsure of how to break in. The world he had been thrown into felt colder than he expected. Here, people didn't know his past, his story. They saw a stranger, someone trying to blend in. Greg, the owner, spotted him right away. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, and he wasted no time. You're late, Greg said, glancing at his watch. Marcus swallowed. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Don't make excuses. Work starts now. Grab a hard hat and get over here. Marcus quickly followed Greg to the site, his nerves churning in his stomach. They assigned him to the back of the crew, where the harder, more manual tasks were. He had to move bricks, clear debris, and assist with lifting heavy materials. The work was grueling. His hands quickly became sore, and sweat poured down his face. Every time he thought he could catch his breath, Greg would show up and demand more. Pick up the pace, Marcus. You're falling behind. The words stung, but Marcus pushed forward. This was his shot. He couldn't afford to mess up. His mind raced. What if he wasn't cut out for this? What if his body gave out before the day was done? The thought of failure was too much to bear. He clenched his jaw and continued to work. Around midday, he found himself exhausted and covered in dirt. His muscles ached from the labor, and his hands were raw. But just when he thought he couldn't go on, a familiar voice cut through the noise of the construction site. Marcus, you good? It was Trump's bodyguard, Michael, who had brought Marcus to the office a few days ago. Marcus looked up, surprised to see him here. Yeah, I'm fine, Marcus replied, his voice hoarse. Just tired. Michael grinned. I hear you're doing good. Greg says you're keeping up, even though it's tough. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow. I'm trying. I don't want to screw this up. You won't, Michael said, a reassuring smile on his face. But don't forget why you're here. You've got a chance, Marcus. Not everyone gets one of these. So, don't waste it. As Michael walked away, Marcus felt a flicker of something inside him. It wasn't just the exhaustion. It was a renewed sense of purpose. He was here to change his life, and he couldn't afford to give up now. By the end of the day, Marcus's body was a battlefield, sore, scraped, and bruised. But he had survived. When Greg finally gave him a nod of approval, it was like a weight lifted from his shoulders. Not bad, Marcus, Greg said gruffly. You're slower than some of these guys, but you've got heart. Keep working, and you might just make something of yourself here." The words were a little rough, but they were the first real acknowledgement Marcus had gotten since this all began. It wasn't a big win, but it was a start. And for Marcus, that was everything. That night, when he returned to his apartment, he collapsed onto the couch. His body was sore, his mind spinning, but he couldn't stop the smile that crept onto his face. He had made it through the day. But even as he lay there, the doubts crept back in. Was this enough? Was this really his chance to change everything? Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Trump's team. "Good work today, Marcus. You've taken the first step. Keep it up." It wasn't much, but it meant everything. For the first time in a long time, someone believed in him, and he was willing to fight to prove it wasn't misplaced. Marcus lay back, staring at the ceiling. There was still a long road ahead of him, but maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path. The days blurred together as Marcus worked harder than he ever had before. The construction site became both his battleground and his proving ground. Every morning he woke up with a sense of purpose. Every night his body screamed in protest, but he refused to stop. The exhaustion was heavy, but so was the pride that came with knowing he was doing something real, something that mattered. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work, and it was a step forward. Greg, though tough and no-nonsense, seemed to take a liking to Marcus. Over the next couple of weeks, Marcus was entrusted with more responsibility. He wasn't just moving bricks anymore. He was learning the ropes, understanding the layout of the job site, and even giving orders to some of the newer workers. It wasn't much, but it was progress. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Marcus finished his shift and sat on the edge of the job site, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He was filthy, his clothes worn and torn from the hard work, but there was a smile on his face, a genuine one. He had done it. He had made it through another day, and he was still standing. As he was packing up his things, he felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Greg. "You did good today, Marcus," Greg said with an approving nod. "Better than I expected. I know you're not used to this kind of work, but you're getting there." Marcus's chest swelled with pride. It was small praise, but it meant everything. For the first time in a long time, someone saw him for more than just his past. They saw him for what he was becoming. Greg continued, "You're getting close to moving up. I've got another job lined up for you next week, something a little more hands-on, a little more challenging. You think you can handle it?" Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I'm ready." "Good," Greg said with a smile. "You keep working like this, and you might just make a career out of this. Don't forget, you've got a second chance here. A lot of people don't get that." The words hung in the air as Marcus watched Greg walk away. He had come so far from the man who had stepped onto that construction site weeks ago, the man who had been unsure, hesitant, and haunted by doubt. Now, he felt different, stronger, more confident. But deep down, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. He had earned this small victory, but the real test was still ahead of him. Would he be able to maintain this progress? Could he build a future from the rubble of his past? As the days turned into weeks, Marcus continued to work hard. Trump's team checked in on him regularly, offering words of encouragement, but Marcus knew that his success didn't depend on their support. It depended on him, and he was determined not to let them, or himself, down. One evening, after finishing his shift, Marcus received a call that would change everything. It was Michael, the bodyguard who had brought him to Trump's office in the first place. "Marcus, how's everything going?" Michael asked. "Good," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "Hard work, but I'm getting the hang of it." "That's great to hear," Michael said. "Listen, I've got something big for you. Trump wants to see you. He's impressed with your progress, and he wants to talk about taking the next step." Marcus's heart raced. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He was about to meet with Trump again, and he had no idea what the conversation would be about. Was this the big break he had been hoping for? Or was it a chance to fall short, to disappoint the one person who had given him a chance? He quickly agreed to meet Trump the following morning at his office. The next day, Marcus stood in front of Trump's towering building, feeling the weight of the moment. This was his opportunity to prove that he wasn't just a product of his circumstances. He was more than that. He had fought for every step of progress, and he wasn't about to stop now. When he entered Trump's office, the billionaire was waiting for him. The same confident, no-nonsense demeanor was there, but there was something different in his eyes, a recognition that Marcus was no longer the man he had met on the streets. He had changed. He had fought for his second chance, and now it was time for the next step. "Marcus, you've done well," Trump said, his voice steady. "I've been following your progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've worked hard, and you've proven yourself. Now, I want to help you take the next step." Trump paused, leaning forward. "I'm offering you a position with one of my companies. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to take everything you've got. But if you're ready, it could change your life." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was his chance to change everything. "I'm ready," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. Trump smiled. "Good. Let's get started, then." As Marcus left Trump's office, a sense of disbelief washed over him. This was happening. He was no longer the man who had wandered the streets with nothing. He was now someone with a future, someone with a chance. But even as the excitement surged inside him, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. He had overcome so much, but there would be more challenges ahead, and the path to success would be anything but easy. But he was ready. He had learned that no matter how difficult life got, he had the strength to keep fighting. He had come this far, and he wouldn't stop now. What do you think Marcus will face next in his new job? Will he be able to keep up with the challenges? Share your thoughts with us. The next few days were a whirlwind for Marcus. After his meeting with Trump, he was introduced to a team of professionals at one of Trump's companies, a real estate development firm. They were the kind of people he had never imagined he would be around. Polished, confident, and well-dressed. But Marcus had no time to feel intimidated. He was on a mission. He had to prove that he belonged, that he was more than just a former homeless man trying to escape his past. His first task was a big one. He had to oversee a construction project on one of Trump's new luxury buildings. It wasn't just physical labor anymore. Now, Marcus was thrust into the world of decision-making, budgeting, and managing workers. He had to learn quickly. Every day, there were meetings where architects, engineers, and contractors discussed plans and timelines. It was overwhelming at first, but Marcus was determined. He studied hard, asked questions, and worked tirelessly to get up to speed. One afternoon, Trump's assistant, Karen, approached him with a concern. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about the project timelines," she said, looking at him with a furrowed brow. "There's been some delay in the material shipment. We're behind schedule, and if we don't catch up, we'll risk missing the deadline. This could affect everything, from the investors to the media." Marcus's heart sank. This was his first big test in the world of high-stakes business, and the pressure was immense. He had always been able to work hard physically, but now he had to juggle a whole new set of challenges: pressure, deadlines, expectations. He paused for a moment, then looked at Karen with determination. "Let me talk to the suppliers. I'll figure it out." Karen gave him a skeptical look but nodded. "All right, but don't make promises you can't keep." Marcus immediately made a call to the supplier, trying to keep his nerves under control. He wasn't used to this kind of responsibility, but he wasn't going to back down. As the conversation went on, he realized just how much he had to learn about the business world. He was talking to the kind of people who didn't care about excuses. They wanted results. Hours later, Marcus managed to secure an expedited shipment. The materials would arrive the next morning, just in time to keep the project on schedule. He couldn't believe it. His heart was pounding with excitement, and as soon as he hung up the phone, he called Karen. "The materials are coming in tomorrow morning," Marcus said, his voice steady. She seemed shocked. "You really got them to move that fast?" "Impressive." Marcus smiled, feeling a rush of pride. He had done it. For the first time, he had taken full ownership of a situation, and it had worked out. The next day, he went to the site early, making sure everything was in place for the new shipment. As he walked around the construction area, observing the workers and checking the materials, he realized just how much he had grown since his first day on the job. He wasn't the same guy who had shown up at the site unsure of his place in the world. He was a part of something bigger now, and he had the skills to keep it moving forward. At lunch, he found himself sitting next to Greg. The older man looked at him with an appraising gaze. "You handled that well yesterday," Greg said. "You're not just a worker here anymore, Marcus. You're a problem solver. And that's something we don't take lightly in this business." Marcus felt a deep sense of pride, but he didn't want to show it too much. He had worked hard for this recognition, and he knew there was still more to prove. "I just did what needed to be done," Marcus said. "But I appreciate the compliment." Greg nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Keep it up. You might just have a future in this business. Hell, you might even be managing your own projects one day." That comment stayed with Marcus throughout the day. He had already come so far, but the road ahead was still long and filled with obstacles. This was a world he wasn't used to, a world of corporate pressures, high expectations, and constant decision-making. But with each challenge, he felt himself getting stronger. This was what he had worked for. This was the future he had dreamed about when he was living on the streets, struggling to survive. That night, after the long day of work, Marcus went home to his apartment. He couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed. Only a few months ago, he had been sleeping in parks, hoping for a scrap of food. Now, he was managing projects, making decisions that could affect millions of dollars. But with success came even more pressure. Marcus knew that he had to keep pushing, keep proving that he deserved to be there. Every moment, every decision was crucial. As he sat on the couch, staring at the city lights outside his window, he thought back to the day Trump had given him this chance. He had seen something in Marcus, something more than just a homeless man. He had seen the potential for change, for growth. And now, Marcus had to live up to that vision. But even as he thought about the future, doubt crept in. Was he really ready for all of this? Could he continue to keep up with the demands of the job? There were days when the weight of it all felt too much to bear. But then he reminded himself, he had survived worse. He had fought for everything he had, and he wasn't about to let it slip away now. As Marcus closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him into sleep, he knew that the next day would bring new challenges. But he was ready. Whatever came his way, he was going to face it head-on. He had already overcome so much, and now, he was on the path to something bigger than he had ever dreamed. The weeks that followed felt like an endless race against time. Marcus had become accustomed to the constant pressure that came with working on high-stakes projects. Every day was a juggling act, balancing multiple tasks, dealing with demanding clients, and navigating the intricate web of decisions that came with the world of real estate. But despite his initial success, cracks began to appear in the foundation of Marcus's newfound life. It all started with a phone call. It was early one morning, just as Marcus was getting ready to head out to the construction site. His phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. Hesitant but curious, he answered. "Marcus." The voice on the other end was rough, filled with a sense of urgency. "It's Greg. You need to get to the site. Now." The tone of Greg's voice sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to steady his breath. "It's the project. There's been a serious problem," Greg said. "Get here as fast as you can. I'll explain when you get here." The words hung in the air, and before Marcus could respond, Greg hung up. His heart raced as he grabbed his jacket and rushed out the door. The drive to the site felt longer than it ever had before. The nagging feeling of dread only intensified with every passing minute. When Marcus arrived, he could immediately tell that something was terribly wrong. The usual hum of activity on the construction site had been replaced by an eerie silence. Workers stood in small groups, talking in hushed voices. A few of them glanced at Marcus as he stepped out of his car, but none of them made eye contact. Greg was waiting for him by the site office, looking unusually grim. "Marcus, there's been an accident," he said, his voice low. "One of the workers, Josh. He got caught in the scaffolding this morning. He's in bad shape. They've called an ambulance, but it doesn't look good." Marcus's heart sank. He knew Josh. He had worked alongside him for the past few weeks. The young man had been one of the first to show Marcus the ropes on the site, and they'd quickly become friends. To hear that something had happened to him felt like a punch to the gut. "Is he?" Marcus couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. "We don't know yet," Greg said, looking down at the ground. "But this could ruin everything. If Josh doesn't make it, the whole project will be delayed, and we're already behind as it is." And worse, if word gets out that this happened on one of Trump's sites, it could destroy the company's reputation. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the situation crashing over him. This wasn't just about the project anymore. This was about real lives. Lives that were on the line because of the risks they were all taking. It was the first time Marcus had truly understood the stakes of the world he was now a part of. He looked at Greg, his mind racing with thoughts of what needed to be done. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. Greg's face tightened. "We need to make sure everything stays under control. I've already called the higher-ups, but you'll need to manage the workers. Keep them calm and focused. And make sure the press doesn't get involved. If the media catches wind of this, it could turn into a nightmare." Marcus nodded, his mind shifting into problem-solving mode. He had to step up, more than ever before. This was his moment, not just to prove that he could handle the work, but to show that he could lead when things went wrong. For the next few hours, Marcus worked relentlessly, overseeing the logistics of getting Josh to the hospital and keeping the site running smoothly. He spoke with the workers, calming them down, making sure they knew that their safety was the top priority. He coordinated with the paramedics, helped the higher-ups make critical decisions, and even spoke to some of the investors who were beginning to get nervous about the delays. But no matter how much he worked, no matter how many fires he put out, one thought kept gnawing at him. He wasn't sure if Josh was going to make it. The uncertainty weighed heavily on Marcus. In his old life, the chaos of the streets had been a constant, but it was a different kind of chaos, something that could be numbed by distance or survival. Now, as he stood in the heart of a multimillion-dollar project, the reality of life and death felt much more real. And in the midst of it all, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had worked for, his new life, his second chance, was teetering on the edge of a cliff. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the phone call came. Marcus's stomach dropped as he answered. "Marcus?" It was Greg again, his voice now sounding even more strained. "Josh, he didn't make it. He passed away at the hospital." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The reality of the loss hit him like a tidal wave. Josh had been a young man with dreams and a future ahead of him, and now he was gone. Marcus felt a deep pang of guilt, as if somehow he should have been able to prevent this, should have done something more. "Greg, what does this mean for the project?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Greg was quiet for a long moment. "It means we're in trouble. We're going to have to rebuild, not just physically, but emotionally too. We've lost a worker, and we've lost time. We're going to have to answer to a lot of people, including Trump." Marcus sat down on the ground, his head spinning. He felt like he was in a storm, caught in the waves of guilt, responsibility, and fear. His heart ached for Josh's family, for the loss that no amount of work or success could fix. In that moment, Marcus realized something. It wasn't just the work that mattered. It wasn't the projects or the timelines or the money. It was the people. And if he was going to succeed in this new life, he had to remember that. The work had to be about more than just building buildings. It had to be about building people up. Marcus felt as if the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. The news of Josh's death was more than just a tragic event. It had shaken him to his core. Despite the frantic efforts to keep the project moving, the loss left a hole, not just in the workers' hearts, but in Marcus's as well. He couldn't help but feel that he hadn't done enough. Josh had been more than just a colleague. He had been a friend. And now, Marcus was faced with the harsh reality that sometimes, no matter how hard you try, things are simply out of your control. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at the construction site was somber. Workers moved through their tasks, but their eyes were heavy with grief. The camaraderie that had once filled the air was replaced by an uncomfortable silence. The accident had cast a shadow over everything, and Marcus knew it was his responsibility to help them through it. But how? He spent hours walking the site, talking to the workers one by one. Some were angry, some were scared, and some were simply heartbroken. They wanted answers, but more than that, they wanted to feel like they weren't just expendable, that their lives mattered beyond the construction materials and deadlines. Marcus understood. It had been the same for him on the streets. He had often felt invisible, discarded. It wasn't just about survival. It was about finding meaning, about feeling seen. One afternoon, as he sat in the trailer where the workers took breaks, Greg approached him. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were tired, as though the stress of the past few days had worn him down. "We need to talk," Greg said, sitting across from Marcus. Marcus nodded, bracing himself for another tough conversation. "About the project?" Greg shook his head. "No, about you." Marcus looked up, surprised. "Me?" "Yes," Greg replied, his voice softer now. "I've been watching you these past few weeks. You've been handling a lot, maybe too much, but you've got something that a lot of people don't. The way you talk to these guys, the way you care about them, it's rare. You've earned their respect, Marcus. And that's more valuable than anything we can build here." Marcus felt a knot form in his throat. He hadn't realized how much it meant to him to hear those words. He had been so focused on the work, on proving himself, that he hadn't stopped to consider how far he had come emotionally. "You really think that?" Marcus asked quietly. "I do," Greg said firmly. "And that's why I'm telling you, maybe it's time for you to take a step back. You don't have to carry everything on your shoulders. It's okay to lean on others. You've shown you have what it takes to lead, but even leaders need help." Marcus sat back, absorbing Greg's words. For the first time in a long time, he realized he didn't have to do everything on his own. He had built a team, a network of people who cared about each other, and it was okay to lean on them. It was okay to ask for help. Later that evening, Marcus received a call from Donald Trump. He had been kept in the loop about Josh's death, and his voice on the phone was steady but serious. "Marcus," Trump began, "I've been briefed on what happened, and I just want to say that I appreciate how you've handled things under such difficult circumstances. But I know this is tough. You're doing a lot, and sometimes it's important to take a step back and reflect. I'm proud of the way you've handled yourself." The words felt like a weight being lifted off his chest. Trump, of all people, had acknowledged his efforts. It meant more than Marcus could put into words. For so long, he had been searching for validation, for a sense of purpose. And now, it seemed like he was starting to find it. As the days went by, Marcus took Greg's advice to heart. He started delegating tasks more, trusting his team to handle parts of the project without feeling the need to micromanage. He made sure to check in with the workers, offering encouragement, but also allowing them the space to process their grief. It wasn't easy, but gradually, the mood at the site began to shift. The workers rallied together, not just for the project, but for each other. A few weeks later, Marcus stood on the site once again, looking at the progress they had made despite the setback. The building was beginning to take shape, and he could see the outline of something truly impressive. But it wasn't just the structure that had changed, it was him. He had grown, not just as a professional, but as a person. He had learned that leadership wasn't just about making decisions or meeting deadlines. It was about empathy, about understanding the people around you. It was about creating an environment where people could trust each other, lean on one another, and move forward together. As he stood there, watching the workers carry on, a thought crossed his mind. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and Marcus pulled it out to see a message from Greg. "We did it. Josh would be proud." Marcus smiled, a small but meaningful gesture. He had learned that no matter the obstacles, the challenges, or the losses, there was always a way to move forward. And now, he was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following Josh's death had passed in a blur. The project, despite its setbacks, was slowly gaining momentum again. Marcus had found his rhythm, not just as a worker, but as a leader. He had learned how to balance the relentless demands of the construction world with the emotional support his team needed. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was building something meaningful, not just the structure on the site, but a sense of community among the workers. But even as things began to stabilize, Marcus knew the hardest challenges were still ahead. The phone rang one morning, cutting through the calm as Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing the project's progress. He glanced at the screen. It was Greg. "Marcus, I just got word," Greg's voice came through the line, tense. "The investors are pushing for a faster timeline. They want the building completed months ahead of schedule. They're putting more pressure on Trump, and Trump's putting more pressure on us." Marcus ran a hand over his face. The weight of that request hit him like a ton of bricks. A faster timeline meant even more hours, more strain on the workers, and, worst of all, the possibility of cutting corners, something Marcus had sworn he wouldn't do. "Do they realize what they're asking?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "They don't care," Greg said bluntly. "They want results. They're more focused on profit than process. You've got to figure out a way to make it work. Fast." The line went silent for a beat, and Marcus felt the familiar rush of stress creep in. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was it going to fall apart because of a deadline? Was he about to be pushed into a corner where he'd have to choose between his morals and his job? He sighed, looking out the window. The workers below continued their tasks, oblivious to the storm brewing above them. He had spent months earning their respect, gaining their trust. And now, it felt like that respect was about to be tested in ways he couldn't predict. "Marcus," Greg continued, his voice quieter now, "I know it's a lot, but I trust you. We've all seen how you lead. You've got what it takes to figure this out." For a moment, Marcus sat in silence, contemplating Greg's words. It was true that he had earned the respect of the team, but was he truly ready for this? Was he strong enough to manage a project this huge and still maintain the values he had fought for? The decision was clear, though. Marcus knew what he had to do. The next day, he called a meeting with the workers. As they gathered around, he stood at the front of the group, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just a meeting about the project. It was a chance to reaffirm his commitment to them and to himself. "Listen, I know things have been tough," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "And I know we've been through a lot recently, but I'm going to be straight with you. The higher-ups want this project finished faster. They're pushing for an unrealistic timeline." There was a murmur of discontent among the workers. Marcus could see the frustration building on their faces. They had worked hard, but the thought of more pressure, more hours, it was almost too much. "I'm not going to lie to you," Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the room. "This is going to be hard, but I promise you, I will not sacrifice your safety, your well-being, or the quality of our work just to meet a deadline. We're a team, and we're going to do this together. At our pace, not anyone else's." There was a long pause as the workers processed his words. Slowly, a few of them nodded, the tension easing slightly. Then, one by one, they voiced their support. "We're with you, Marcus," Greg said from the back of the room, giving him a reassuring smile. The workers agreed, acknowledging the importance of sticking together. It was a pivotal moment, and Marcus realized just how far he had come. What had started as a simple project had turned into a shared mission, a test of not just their physical strength, but their unity and resolve. The days that followed were long and exhausting, but the team had found their stride. Marcus took charge, delegating responsibilities, ensuring that every task was completed with care. He maintained open communication, keeping everyone in the loop, and making sure no one felt like they were in it alone. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the site, Marcus stood by the scaffolding, surveying the progress. The building was beginning to take shape, rising higher and higher, just like the dreams of those who worked on it. "Looking good, huh?" Greg said, stepping beside him. Marcus smiled, nodding. "Yeah, it's coming together." But even as he admired the work, he knew the real test was still ahead. The investors would want to see results soon. Trump would want answers. And Marcus, for all his determination, couldn't help but wonder if the storm would hit again, this time with even greater force. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing that no matter what happened next, he was ready. He had learned that success wasn't just about meeting deadlines or making money. It was about the people who helped you get there, the ones who stood by you through thick and thin. And as long as he had their trust, he knew he could face anything the future threw his way. What do you think Marcus will do when the pressure becomes too much? Will he be able to balance it all, or will the burden break him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The days that followed seemed to blur together. The relentless pace of the project was beginning to take its toll. Marcus had pushed the workers hard, but they were responding, working late into the evenings, giving it their all. They were a team, more united than ever, but even the strongest teams have their breaking point. The pressure from the investors was mounting. They didn't care about the personal lives of the workers. All they wanted was results. And the clock was ticking. Marcus had done everything he could to keep the team motivated. But he knew he couldn't hold them together forever without something to give. He could feel the exhaustion in every muscle, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him with each passing day. Then came the phone call that would change everything. It was early in the morning when Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Greg. He opened it quickly, his stomach sinking as he read the words, "The investors are here. They want to meet with you today. Trump will be there too. It's time to show them what we've got." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The stakes had never been higher. They were going to see if all the sweat, the long nights, and the sacrifices were worth it. Marcus glanced out the window of his office, watching as the workers filed in, tired but determined. He had come so far, but now it felt like everything was about to come crashing down. As he made his way to the site, Marcus could feel the tension in the air. The workers were nervous. This meeting would determine their future. Would they be rewarded for their hard work, or would they be blamed for falling short of the impossible expectations? When he arrived at the meeting room, the investors were already seated at a long table. The room was cold, sterile, the air thick with anticipation. Trump sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The investors, a mix of men and women in business suits, watched him closely, as if waiting for him to slip up. "Marcus," Trump greeted him, his voice steady but firm. "We've been watching the progress, and I'll be honest, it's impressive. But the reality is, we need more. We need results now. The timeline isn't just a suggestion. It's the only way forward." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. He had expected this, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. "I understand," Marcus said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "But I've been pushing my team as hard as I can. They're giving everything they've got, and we're still on track. But this isn't just about speed, it's about quality. I won't let anyone cut corners." The investors exchanged skeptical glances. One of them, a man in his 50s with a sharp suit and even sharper gaze, leaned forward. "Marcus, we don't care about your morals. We care about results. If you can't meet our deadline, we'll find someone who can." The words stung more than Marcus expected. He had fought so hard to protect his team, to ensure their hard work wasn't in vain, and now he was being told it didn't matter. "Marcus," Trump spoke again, his tone a little softer now, "you've done well so far. But this is business. You know what you need to do." Marcus took a deep breath, fighting the wave of frustration threatening to overwhelm him. This wasn't the time to back down. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let these investors dictate the pace of his work. "Mr. Trump," Marcus said, standing tall, "I've given you everything I've got. I've put my heart and soul into this project, and so have my workers. If you want results, you need to give us the time to do it right. I won't sacrifice quality for speed." The room fell silent. The investors looked at each other, sizing him up, their eyes cold and calculating. But Trump, surprisingly, didn't break his gaze. "All right," he said, after what felt like an eternity, "I'll give you a bit more time, but you'd better deliver. This project isn't just about you anymore. It's about the future of this company. Don't let us down." Marcus nodded, relief flooding him. He had done it. For now, he had won this battle. As he left the room, he felt the weight of the meeting still hanging over him. They had given him a bit more time, but the pressure wasn't going away. He still had to deliver, and the stakes were higher than ever. When Marcus returned to the site, he gathered the workers, his mind still buzzing with the conversation he had just had. He knew what he had to do. There was no room for error now. "I've got good news," Marcus began, his voice steady. "We've got a little more time. The investors are giving us another shot." A cheer broke out from the workers, the tension in the air lifting for a brief moment. But Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There was still so much to do, and the deadline was looming over them like a storm cloud. As the workers got back to work, Marcus stood by, watching them with a mixture of pride and anxiety. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything he had worked for. Would they succeed? Would they be able to meet the impossible expectations? Or would the pressure break them all? Marcus didn't have the answers, But he knew one thing for sure. He would fight for his team. He wouldn't let them down. The days after the meeting felt like a fragile truce, a fleeting moment of relief that didn't last long. Marcus had managed to buy more time, but the pressure was relentless. The construction site, once a place of camaraderie and hard work, now felt more like a pressure cooker. The workers had been giving everything they had, and yet, it never felt like it was enough. Every day, Marcus could feel the weight of the investors' expectations growing heavier. They were always lurking in the background, their voices echoing in his mind, reminding him of the impossible standards they had set. And with Trump's constant presence, it felt like the stakes kept rising, inch by painful inch. By the third week, the cracks in the system began to show. One of the workers, Jake, a veteran carpenter with a deep love for his craft, was the first to break. He had been working long hours, pushing through fatigue, but the stress had taken its toll. One afternoon, as he was nailing the final piece of a wall frame, his hands shook, and he missed the mark. The hammer slipped from his grip, and he swore loudly, startling the crew nearby. Marcus immediately walked over, concern etched across his face. "Jake, you all right?" Jake rubbed his forehead, sweat mingling with dirt. "I'm fine," he grumbled, clearly frustrated, but his eyes were bloodshot, and his movements were sluggish. "Just tired, that's all." "You sure?" Marcus asked, his voice softer now. He could see the exhaustion in Jake's posture, the weariness that had slowly crept into every movement. Jake hesitated before letting out a heavy sigh. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. We're all running on fumes, Marcus. Every day feels like a battle, and for what? So they can slap a deadline on us and call it progress?" The words stung, but Marcus knew Jake wasn't alone in feeling this way. The workers were tired. Their morale had begun to wane, and Marcus had to act fast before things spiraled out of control. He called a meeting, gathering the crew together. As they assembled, Marcus could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the weight of the pressure visible in every line of their faces. He cleared his throat, standing tall before them. "I know you're all feeling it," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This has been the hardest stretch of this project, and it's not over yet. The pressure, the demands, it's a lot, I get it. But I'm not going to let you burn out. You've all given your best, and I see that. I appreciate that more than you know. But we need to figure out how to keep going without breaking." The workers listened in silence, the tension in the air thick. Marcus took a deep breath, choosing his next words carefully. "I'm not going to let anyone keep working at this pace if it means risking their health or their safety. We're going to bring in extra help, and we'll reassign some of the tasks so you can get the rest you deserve." There was a murmur of relief, but Jake's voice cut through the quiet. "Extra help won't fix the bigger problem, Marcus. They want us to move mountains, but we're not built for that. We're human, not machines." Marcus met his gaze, nodding slowly. Jake was right. The workers weren't machines, and no matter how much they gave, there was always a breaking point. He needed to find a way to manage the expectations of the investors without sacrificing the well-being of the team. "I know," Marcus said, his voice steady but with a hint of frustration, "but I'll find a way to make this work. We'll get through this together." As the meeting broke up, Marcus felt a mix of relief and anxiety. He had said the right words, but deep down, he wasn't sure if it would be enough. The storm was coming, and he could feel it in every fiber of his being. The investors, Trump, the pressure. It was all building to something he couldn't control. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. Word spread quickly that one of the workers, Alex, had been injured on the site. He had slipped from a scaffold while trying to fix a piece of equipment, breaking his leg in the fall. Marcus rushed to the hospital, his stomach churning with guilt. Alex's injury was a wake-up call. The risk of pushing the team too hard had finally caught up with them, and it was no longer just about the project. It was about the people who had put everything on the line to make it happen. As he sat in the sterile waiting room, Marcus's phone buzzed with another message from Greg. The investors were demanding an update on the progress. Trump would be on site the next day, and they expected to see major results. A bitter laugh escaped Marcus's lips. Major results? The only result he could see was a team on the verge of collapse. He paced in the waiting room, his mind racing. How could he keep going like this? How could he keep his team safe when every day felt like a battle they couldn't win? That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked through the construction site in the dark, the eerie silence pressing down on him. The skeleton of the building loomed in the distance, its steel framework glowing under the dim lights. He had spent so much time here, weeks, months, and now, it felt like it was all slipping through his fingers. As he walked closer to the structure, his mind raced with thoughts of the investors and Trump. The deadline was approaching fast, and every decision felt more important than the last. He had been trying to please everyone, trying to make everyone happy, but in the process, he had lost sight of what really mattered. His team, their health, their well-being. Suddenly, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to let this project destroy everything he had worked for. He was going to fight for his people, no matter the cost. If the investors wanted results, they would have to understand that there was more to building a skyscraper than meeting a deadline. There was something deeper at stake, something far more important than just bricks and steel. Marcus took a deep breath and made a call. It was time to make a stand. Marcus spent the entire night contemplating his decision. The weight of it pressed heavily on him as the first rays of dawn filtered through the construction site. He knew he couldn't allow the situation to continue as it was. There had to be a way to balance the pressure from the investors with the well-being of his team. And he was done compromising. By the time the sun rose, he had made up his mind. The next day, when Trump and the investors showed up to inspect the site, Marcus wasn't going to give them the answer they expected. He wasn't going to cave under the pressure anymore. He was going to take a stand for the workers who had been pushing themselves to the limit. As he walked through the site that morning, there was a noticeable difference in the atmosphere. The workers were still tired, but their eyes were determined. They knew things had changed after the meeting the previous day. They were in this together, for better or for worse. Marcus walked into the makeshift office trailer, where Greg was already waiting, tapping nervously on his tablet. He looked up when Marcus entered, concern written across his face. "Marcus, the investors are coming. Are you sure about this? If you do this, there's no going back. They won't take it well." Marcus clenched his jaw, his resolve hardening. "I know, Greg, but this can't go on any longer. The investors are treating this like a race, but it's a marathon. If we keep pushing the team like this, someone's going to get hurt, or worse. I'm not willing to let that happen." Greg let out a deep breath, nodding slowly. "I get it, man. I do. But be prepared for the consequences. You're about to challenge Trump himself." Marcus didn't reply immediately. He wasn't sure what the consequences would be, but he knew he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. The investors arrived shortly after lunch. Trump was the first to step out of the car, his usual confident smirk on his face as he surveyed the construction site. He was flanked by several investors who barely acknowledged the workers, their eyes focused solely on the progress of the building. "Marcus," Trump's voice boomed across the site, causing several of the workers to look up from their tasks. "How are we doing here? Are we on track?" Marcus stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest. He walked up to Trump and the investors, his steps purposeful. "We're making progress," he said, his voice firm. "But the pace you're expecting is unrealistic. The team is stretched thin. We're all running on fumes." Trump's expression remained unchanged. "I don't care how tired they are. The project has to be done on time. We've invested too much for this to fail." Marcus stood his ground. "I understand your position, but we can't keep pushing people like this. The workers are dedicated, but they can only give so much. I won't risk their health for a deadline. If you want results, we need more time. And we need to bring in more resources." The silence that followed was deafening. The investors exchanged glances, surprise flickering in their eyes. Marcus could feel the tension mounting. Trump finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you telling me that you can't deliver? That you're going to walk away from this project?" Marcus held his gaze, refusing to back down. "No, I'm telling you that I won't sacrifice my team just to meet a deadline. I believe in this project, but I believe in the people working on it more. If that means pushing back the deadline, then so be it. But I won't compromise on their safety." The investors looked at each other, a sense of disbelief hanging in the air. Marcus could see them weighing their options. Would they respect his decision, Or would they let the pressure break him? For a moment, it seemed like the room was holding its breath. Then Trump stepped forward, his face hardening. "You're playing a dangerous game, Marcus. But I'll respect your decision, for now. But mark my words, if this project fails, it's on you." Marcus nodded, not knowing whether he had won or lost. But he had made his stand, and that was all that mattered. As the investors left, Marcus's stomach was still in knots. He had no idea what the fallout would be, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. He had gone up against the most powerful people in the room and had refused to back down. For better or worse, the die had been cast. The workers gathered around him after the meeting. They had been watching from a distance, nervous but hopeful. They could sense that something had changed. Marcus looked at them, a mixture of pride and uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm not going to let this project destroy you. You've given everything, and you deserve to be treated like people, not machines." There was a moment of silence before Jake, the carpenter who had spoken up before, stepped forward. He clapped Marcus on the back, a grin breaking out across his face. "You did good, Marcus. We're with you, man." The rest of the crew nodded in agreement. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Marcus why he had fought so hard to get here. They were a team, and they had each other's backs. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his office, staring out the window at the skeleton of the building. The decision he had made earlier that day still weighed heavily on him. He had stood up for his workers, but what if the investors didn't take it well? What if this was the end of everything he had worked for? As the sun set, he heard a knock on the door. It was Greg, his face serious. "You might want to see this," he said, handing Marcus a tablet. Marcus took it, scrolling through the email that had just arrived. It was from the investors. "I've got a response from the investors," Marcus said, his voice tense. He read it aloud. "We've decided to give you the time and resources you've requested. We expect you to deliver as promised. But know this, Marcus, you will be held accountable for any further delays." Marcus set the tablet down, a mixture of relief and fear flooding his chest. He had won, for now, but the real challenge was just beginning. For the next few days, a sense of relief washed over the construction site. The workers, though still weary, could feel the difference in the air. There was an unspoken understanding that they weren't alone anymore. Marcus had stood up for them, and the investors had given them a bit of breathing room. It was a rare moment of peace, and for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt like he could finally take a deep breath. But peace never lasts long. Even with the extra resources promised, there was still an overwhelming sense of urgency. The deadline loomed large on the horizon, and the pressure to complete the project remained unyielding. The workers had been given more time, but now the task was to make up for the delays that had already piled up. Marcus knew the real test was yet to come. He had won a small battle, but the war wasn't over. The investors, including Trump, would expect results, and no amount of extra time would be enough if they didn't see significant progress. By the second week after the meeting with Trump, the extra workers had arrived, and a new sense of organization began to take shape. New teams were deployed to speed up the work, but the team of original workers, the ones who had been there from the start, still bore the brunt of the physical labor. Marcus was working harder than ever, managing the project's logistics while keeping an eye on every detail. But it was clear that even with the extra hands, the burden was too much. One night, after a long day of overseeing operations, Marcus sat in his office, staring at a stack of blueprints. His mind was exhausted, and his body felt like it had been run over by a freight train. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, and the silence of the empty office echoed in his ears. There was a knock on the door, and Greg stepped in, his face tense. "Marcus, we need to talk," Greg said quietly. "The investors are starting to push again. They're not happy with the progress, and Trump's breathing down our necks." Marcus rubbed his eyes, already feeling the pressure creeping in. "We're working as fast as we can. We've got the extra help. What else do they want?" Greg sighed and walked over to the desk. "They want results, Marcus. The kind that'll impress them. The kind that'll show them that their money is well spent. Trump won't take any excuses this time." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He knew Greg was right. The investors, Trump in particular, weren't the kind to settle for anything less than perfection. They would push and push until the job was done. And if it wasn't, they'd walk away, no matter how many people had worked tirelessly to make it happen. "We need to finish it," Marcus muttered, more to himself than to Greg. "We need to make it work, no matter the cost." Greg nodded. "I know. But at what cost, Marcus? We're already stretched thin. The workers are barely hanging on. If we push them any harder, I don't know what'll happen." There it was, the hard truth. Marcus had been so focused on meeting the expectations of the investors that he had begun to lose sight of the human cost. His team, the people who had fought alongside him from day one, were on the brink of exhaustion. Some were already voicing their frustrations. Others had become more withdrawn, silent under the weight of their own fatigue. "I don't know what the right answer is anymore, Greg," Marcus admitted, his voice thick with uncertainty. "We're running out of time, and we're running out of options." Greg stood there for a moment, clearly wrestling with his own feelings. Sometimes, doing the right thing means making the hard choice. "I don't know what that choice is, but we can't let the pressure break us. If we do, we'll all lose." Marcus nodded, a wave of guilt washing over him. He had pushed his team so hard, and now he was asking them to do even more. The thought of it felt like a betrayal. The next day, Marcus called a meeting with the crew. As they gathered around him, their faces were a mix of exhaustion and determination. They had been through so much already, but Marcus could see the toll it had taken on them. "I know things haven't been easy," Marcus began, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "We've been working around the clock, and I've asked a lot of all of you. But we're getting close to the finish line. I can feel it. I know you're all tired. I know you're frustrated. But we're in this together." There was a long pause as the workers exchanged looks, unsure of where Marcus was going with this. Finally, Jake spoke up. "Marcus, we've been working like this for months. Some of us are about to break. We're doing everything we can, but at what point does it become enough?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truth. Marcus didn't have an immediate answer. He had pushed them this far, but he wasn't sure how much further they could go without breaking. I know, Marcus said, his voice softer now. "And I'm sorry. I've been pushing you because I believed in this. I believe in all of you. But I need to ask one more thing. We're almost there. I need you to dig just a little deeper. I need you to push through just a little longer." The room was silent. Marcus could see the doubt in their eyes. He had asked them for so much already. What more could he possibly ask of them? After a long pause, it was Jake again who spoke, his voice quieter this time. "We're with you, Marcus. But we need to know that this is worth it. If we push through, what are we doing this for? What's the end goal?" Marcus swallowed hard. He knew what Jake was asking wasn't just about the project. It was about their dignity, their purpose. It was about understanding why they had been working so hard. "We're doing this to prove that we can. To show that we are more than just workers on a job site. We're building something that will last, something that will matter. And we're doing it together." Jake gave a small nod, and the others followed suit. They didn't have all the answers, but they were with him. They had come this far, and they weren't about to give up now. That evening, Marcus stood in the center of the site, watching the workers resume their tasks with renewed determination. He had asked the impossible, but they had answered. There was a fire in their eyes again, a spark of hope that had been missing for too long. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The investors would continue to push, and Trump would be relentless. But Marcus was no longer afraid of the pressure. He had something more powerful on his side now. His team? What will happen as the project nears completion? Will the workers push through the final stretch, or will the pressure become too much? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The final stretch was in sight, but the toll it was taking on Marcus and his team was becoming painfully obvious. The workers were moving faster, their bodies running on pure adrenaline, but the exhaustion was creeping into their every step. Marcus saw it in their eyes. He knew they were running on fumes. But there was no turning back now. The investors, including Trump, were relentless. They demanded progress reports every day, pushed for more speed, more output, and more results. Each time Marcus reported the workers' status, Trump's response was the same. "It's not enough. Get it done." The pressure was suffocating. One evening, as Marcus walked the site after hours, Checking in with the night shift, he found Jake, the carpenter, standing alone by the scaffolding, staring at the half-finished building. His hands were on his hips, and his shoulders were slumped. He looked defeated. "Hey, Jake," Marcus called, approaching him. "You okay?" Jake turned slowly, his face drawn, his eyes tired. "I don't know anymore, Marcus. We're working as hard as we can, but it doesn't feel like it's enough. Every time we finish one thing, there's something else waiting to be done. It's like we're stuck in a never-ending cycle." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. "I know, man. I know. It's tough, but we're almost there. The finish line is right around the corner. Just a little longer." Jake shook his head. "But for what? We're pushing ourselves to the limit. I don't know how much longer we can keep going like this." Some of the guys are already starting to talk about quitting. The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. He had seen the signs of burnout in the crew, but to hear it spoken out loud made it all the more real. He knew Jake wasn't the only one feeling this way. Everyone was, but nobody had the courage to voice it. "Jake, I don't know what to say. You've all been incredible. I'm proud of you. But I can't keep asking you to do more without knowing if it's worth it." For a long moment, Jake didn't respond. Finally, he let out a long breath, his voice heavy. "I've been with you from the start, Marcus. I've given everything for this project, but I don't know how much more I can give. We all have limits, and we're getting close to ours." Marcus stood silently, feeling the weight of Jake's words. He had been so focused on getting the job done, on meeting the expectations of the investors, that he had forgotten to take care of the people who made it all possible. They weren't machines. They were people, and they were breaking under the strain. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. During the morning meeting with the investors, Marcus had barely finished his update when Trump cut him off. His face was a mixture of frustration and impatience. "This isn't good enough, Marcus. I need more progress. You're telling me you've brought in more workers, but it's still not enough. We're not going to sit around and wait for you to finish. This is your last chance. You either deliver, or we pull the plug." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Marcus tried to hold his ground, but the anger and frustration he had been holding in for so long began to bubble over. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice shaking slightly. "I've given you everything I can. I've pushed my team to their limits. But you don't see the cost of this. The workers are tired, and we're pushing them to the breaking point. If you want results, you need to start thinking about what it takes to get there. You can't keep treating this like it's just about deadlines. These are real people. They have families, lives outside of this project." Trump's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "I don't care about their families, Marcus. I care about results. You're paid to get it done, not to lecture me." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus could feel the tension building, but he refused to back down. This time, he wasn't going to let Trump get away with it. "I can't do it, Trump," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. "I can't keep sacrificing my team for a project. If you want to pull out, then do it. But I won't let you destroy everything we've worked for." The room was still, the weight of Marcus's words hanging in the air. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Trump's lips curled into a cold smile. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. You've made your choice." That afternoon, Marcus stood in the middle of the construction site, surrounded by his workers. The reality of the situation was sinking in. He had taken a stand, but at what cost? The investors weren't going to wait forever. And now, with Trump's ultimatum hanging over them, Marcus had no idea how much longer they could keep going. Jake approached him, his face solemn. "You did the right thing, Marcus. I know it wasn't easy, but you stood up for us." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "But at what cost, Jake? I don't know if it's enough." Jake didn't say anything, but the two of them stood there, side by side, looking at the unfinished building. The project was close, but it felt like it was slipping further away with every passing moment. As the days passed, Marcus could feel the pressure mounting. His team was exhausted, and the investors' demands were growing more aggressive by the hour. The line between dedication and burnout was becoming increasingly blurred. He couldn't keep asking his team to do the impossible. But if he didn't, the project would collapse, and with it, everything he had worked for. Marcus was at a crossroads. He had made the hard choice to stand up for his workers, but now he had to face the consequences. Would he be able to pull them through, or was this the end of the line? What do you think Marcus should do next? Can he turn things around, or will the pressure break him and his team? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The days that followed were the hardest Marcus had ever faced. The air on the construction site seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, suffocating the workers as much as the deadlines that loomed over them. Every morning, the sound of hammers and saws, the roar of machines, and the shouts of the foreman were the backdrop to a battle that was not just about building a structure, but about holding on to something much deeper, a sense of dignity, a sense of purpose. Marcus woke up every morning with a pit in his stomach. He had taken a stand by standing up to Trump, but he knew it wasn't enough. His team was weary, and the investors, especially Trump, were pressing harder than ever for results. It was a dangerous game he was playing, and each day, the stakes got higher. That afternoon, as Marcus paced the site, trying to figure out how to make the next push, he received a call. It was Greg, his right-hand man. "Marcus, you need to come to the office." "Now," Greg said, his tone sharp. "It's urgent." When Marcus arrived at the office, Greg was already there, waiting for him with a grim look on his face. As soon as Marcus stepped through the door, Greg didn't waste any time. "They're pulling out Marcus," he said, his words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Trump's had enough. He's pulling the plug on the project. The deadline's just too close. They're cutting their losses." Marcus felt a cold wave wash over him. For weeks, he had been pouring everything he had into this project, his energy, his time, his heart. To hear that it was all about to come crashing down felt like a gut punch. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "They can't do that. We're so close." Greg looked down, shaking his head. "I'm afraid it's true. Trump's already made his decision. They're moving in another direction. He's not willing to take the risk anymore." Marcus stared out the window, his thoughts racing. How could it all fall apart so quickly? How could they have come this far only to be left with nothing? That evening, Marcus called another meeting with the workers. As they gathered around, their faces drawn and tired, he could sense their hope fading. They had been working for months, giving everything they had, but now they were faced with the reality that their efforts might have been in vain. "I need to be honest with you all," Marcus said, his voice heavy. "The investors are pulling out. The project is being canceled. We've been working tirelessly, and I know how hard you've all pushed yourselves, but it's over." The room was silent. The sound of the workers' footsteps had always been the rhythm of progress, but now, all that filled the space was the eerie sound of disbelief. Jake was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "So, that's it? After everything?" Marcus nodded, his heart aching. "Yeah, that's it." The disappointment was palpable. The workers had invested so much of themselves into this project, more than just sweat and labor, but hope, dreams, and a sense of pride. And now, it was all slipping away. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, looking at the faces before him. "I tried. I really did." As the workers dispersed, murmurs of frustration and anger echoed across the site. Some of them had families to feed. Some had dreams of what this job could do for them, of how it could change their lives. And now, those dreams felt like shattered glass on the ground. Marcus remained in the center of the site, staring at the unfinished building. The weight of the failure was crushing, but there was also something else beneath the surface, a flicker of defiance. He wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The next day, Marcus gathered his team for one last effort. His mind raced as he considered his options. There was still a chance. He could still fight. But how? "I know everything feels like it's falling apart right now," Marcus began, addressing his workers. "But I won't let us go down like this. We've fought too hard. We've given everything. And just because the investors are backing out doesn't mean we have to quit. We can finish this. We can prove to them that we are more than just the sum of our efforts. We are builders. And builders don't stop until the job's done." The workers exchanged looks, some still skeptical, others starting to feel the fire of determination reignite. Jake stepped forward, his face still tired but resolute. "You're right. We've been through too much to quit now. We're in this together, Marcus. Let's finish what we started. There was a murmur of agreement, and for the first time in days, Marcus saw hope flicker in their eyes. He wasn't in this alone. As the day wore on, Marcus threw himself back into the project with renewed energy. He walked through the site, speaking to every worker, checking every detail, ensuring that everything was in motion. There was no room for mistakes, no time to slow down. The investors' decision had been devastating, but Marcus wasn't going to let it be the end. He would finish the project, even if he had to do it without their support. He owed it to his team, to himself, and to the dream they had all shared. Later that night, Marcus received another call. It was Greg. "Marcus," Greg said, his voice tense, "Trump wants to meet. He's reconsidering the decision. He wants to see how much we've progressed." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. This was it, his last shot. "I'll be there," Marcus said, hanging up the phone. The next morning, Marcus stood in front of the investors, including Trump, at the construction site. Trump's sharp eyes scanned the progress, and Marcus could feel the weight of his gaze. "Marcus, you're pushing your team hard," Trump said, his voice cool. "I want to see the progress you've made. Show me what you've got." For the next hour, Marcus walked the investors through the site, pointing out the improvements and the work that had been completed. He knew it wasn't perfect. There were still flaws, areas that needed attention, but it was more than enough to prove they were capable of finishing the job. Trump remained silent, observing closely, but Marcus could feel a shift in the air. The tension, once oppressive, seemed to loosen slightly. Finally, Trump spoke, his voice colder than usual. "You've done better than I expected, Marcus. But don't get complacent. Keep pushing. There's still a lot of work to do." Marcus nodded, but inside, he felt a spark of relief. Trump hadn't canceled the project yet. There was still hope. As Marcus walked back to the site, he knew the fight was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, he felt like they had a fighting chance. His team had pulled through, and now he was more determined than ever to see it through to the end. The days that followed the meeting with Trump were some of the most grueling of Marcus's life. There was no time to waste, no moment to rest. The pressure had never been more intense. The deadline was looming, and the construction site was alive with urgency. Workers moved faster, voices became sharper, and every corner of the site was a hive of activity. The workers, still bruised and exhausted, pushed forward, motivated by the fear of failure and the hope that they could prove to Trump and to themselves that they could finish what they had started. But as Marcus walked through the site, he saw the toll it was taking. The exhaustion was evident in the faces of his team. Every morning, they showed up, but every night, they left with heavy hearts, unsure if they could give any more. The weight of the unfinished building loomed large over them, a constant reminder of how much still needed to be done. On the third day after the meeting, Marcus was called into another urgent meeting with Trump. The tension was high as Marcus entered the conference room, greeted by the cold stares of the investors, including Trump. The air was thick with the expectation of immediate progress, and Marcus knew this conversation was going to be a make-or-break moment. "Marcus," Trump began, his voice low and firm, "I've been watching closely. You've made improvements, but they're not enough. The deadline is in 3 days. If you can't get this finished on time, there's no chance we're moving forward." Marcus clenched his fists, trying to suppress his anger. He had pushed his team as hard as possible, but he also knew they were stretched to the limit. The thought of disappointing everyone who had worked so hard, who had invested their time and energy into this project, was unbearable. "I understand, Mr. Trump," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady despite the rising frustration inside. "We're doing everything we can, but we need more time. My team is giving their all, but we're at a breaking point. If you want quality, we need that extra time. We're almost there, but not quite." Trump's eyes narrowed, and the room fell silent. Marcus could feel the weight of the man's gaze on him, the pressure tightening like a vice. "I'm not giving you more time," Trump said finally, his voice cold. "You either finish it in 3 days, or it's over. Do you understand me?" Marcus fought to keep his composure. He knew that this was it. This was the final test. He could feel the strain in his body, the exhaustion that threatened to consume him, but there was no room for hesitation. He had to finish this, for the sake of his team and the workers who had given everything. "I'll make it happen," Marcus said, his voice resolute. "We'll finish it on time." The next few days were a blur. Marcus barely slept, spending every waking moment on the site, moving from one task to the next. His body ached, and his mind was clouded with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. His team was pushing forward, working in shifts, taking turns, but they were all barely hanging on. The workers were tired, but the fear of failure, of losing the project after all the sacrifices they had made, kept them going. It was on the second-to-last day that Marcus hit his breaking point. He was standing on a scaffold, overseeing the finishing touches on the exterior of the building, when he saw Jake, the carpenter, stumble as he climbed down. His face was pale, and his steps were uneven. Marcus rushed over, his heart pounding in his chest. "Jake," Marcus called, grabbing his arm to steady him. "What's going on? You okay?" Jake looked up at Marcus, his eyes glazed and unfocused. I'm fine," Jake said weakly. "Just a little dizzy. I've been pushing myself hard, but I'll be okay." Marcus could see that Jake wasn't okay. He was barely holding it together, and it was clear the exhaustion had finally caught up with him. His body was giving out, but Jake was too stubborn to admit it. Marcus could see the same signs of burnout in several others as well, and it hit him hard. The workers were at their limit. "I need you to rest, Jake," Marcus said firmly. "You can't keep going like this. We need you at your best, not at your breaking point." Jake tried to protest, but Marcus wasn't having it. "Go home. Get some sleep. I'll make sure the crew keeps things moving. You've done more than enough." Jake finally nodded and, with a weak smile, walked off the site, heading home. But as he left, Marcus felt a pang of guilt. How many others were in the same position? How many were sacrificing their health for the sake of this project? That night, Marcus made a difficult decision. He gathered the workers together, addressing them as they gathered in the break room, some sitting on crates, others leaning against the walls. The room was filled with a quiet exhaustion that spoke volumes. "I need to talk to you all," Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "I know you've all given everything for this project, but I can see it. Your bodies, your minds are breaking. I can't ask you to give any more." The room was still, the workers watching him with eyes that had seen too much. Marcus could feel the weight of their fatigue, their frustration. "I'm not going to force anyone to keep going if they're not able to," Marcus continued. "If you need to rest, do it. If you need to step away, I understand. But for the rest of you who still have it in you, we have one final push." Jake's absence was a reminder of how fragile their situation was. They had reached the point where pushing harder could lead to even worse consequences, but there was also the looming fear of failure. The deadline was now just one day away. After a long silence, one of the workers, Tom, a foreman who had been with Marcus from the beginning, stood up. His voice was firm but filled with exhaustion. "We've come this far, Marcus. If we fall short now, we've lost everything. We're with you." One by one, the workers nodded, stepping forward with renewed resolve. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about proving to themselves that they could finish this, that they could see it through to the end. That final day was a blur of non-stop activity. The workers dug deep, pushing through the pain and the fatigue. Marcus was there with them every step of the way, overseeing the work, offering encouragement, doing everything he could to keep the team moving. As the sun began to set and the final touches were put in place, Marcus took a moment to step back and take it all in. The building stood tall in front of him, its skeleton now complete, its structure finally solid. There was still work to be done, but they had done it. The impossible was now within reach. As the last truck pulled away from the site, Marcus stood there, watching it disappear into the horizon. It was over. They had made it. But as he stood there, a new question filled his mind. What would happen now? Would it be enough? The last day on the construction site felt like a whirlwind. The sound of hammers, drills, and the occasional shout of a worker echoed through the air as the clock ticked relentlessly toward the final hour. Marcus could feel the tension thickening, the sense of anticipation building with each passing minute. The stakes were higher than ever. If they didn't finish this project today, everything would have been for nothing. All the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, the bruised bodies, and strained minds would go down the drain. As the workers continued their tasks, Marcus found himself running from one corner of the site to another, ensuring everything was on track. There was still so much to do. Final touches on the exterior, cleaning the interior, checking the electrical systems, and making sure the entire building was up to code. His mind raced as he scanned the horizon, every step feeling like it could be the one that would make or break their chances. But it wasn't just the physical work that weighed on him. Marcus could sense the emotional strain in the air. His workers, despite their renewed resolve, were exhausted. Their bodies had given everything they had, and now it was a fight against time and fatigue. There was a shared understanding among them all. This was the final stretch, and if they didn't make it, they had nothing to show for all their effort. Marcus couldn't let them down. Not now. At midday, the site foreman, Tom, called Marcus over. His face was lined with sweat, his body clearly worn out, but there was a glint of determination in his eyes. "Marcus, we're almost there," Tom said, wiping his brow. "But there's one problem we haven't been able to solve. The lighting on the top floor, it's still not working right. If we don't fix it soon, it'll be a huge issue." Trump's team is scheduled to do their final inspection in just a few hours. Marcus cursed under his breath. The final inspection was scheduled, and without proper lighting, there was no way they could pass. It was one of the final pieces of the puzzle, and it had to be perfect. He immediately grabbed a flashlight and raced up to the top floor. As he reached the area where the lights were malfunctioning, he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The wiring was complicated, and after several hours of running diagnostics, it seemed as though they were still no closer to fixing it. Minutes ticked away, and frustration set in. The workers gathered around him, unsure of what to do. Their eyes were filled with exhaustion, but there was also a spark of determination. They had come so far, and they weren't about to stop now. "You know what, Marcus?" Jake, who had returned after a rest, said as he joined the team at the top floor. "We've been at this for too long to back out now. If we have to fix this one wire by hand, we will. Let's give it everything we've got." Marcus looked around at the workers. Each of them had the same look in their eyes, a mixture of exhaustion and unyielding resolve. They had reached their limit, but still, they were here, working together, fighting for this. Marcus nodded, pushing back the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. "All right, let's do this," he said. "We can fix this." They worked in unison, each worker doing their part, climbing ladders, tracing wires, checking circuits, and reattaching connectors. Time was slipping through their fingers, but with every second, they grew closer to fixing the issue. Sweat poured down their faces, but they kept going. They knew the stakes. They knew that their future, every bit of dignity, every ounce of pride they had fought for, hung in the balance. By the time the final hour arrived, the lights were fixed. The building stood ready for inspection. The last pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place. As the investors, including Trump, arrived on site for the final inspection, Marcus could feel the weight of the moment. His heart was pounding in his chest. This was it. He had no idea what Trump's reaction would be, but he knew that if they could just show them what they had accomplished, it would all be worth it. Trump's sharp gaze swept over the site as he walked through the building. The investors followed closely behind, scrutinizing every corner, every detail. The air was thick with tension, the final moments of this journey unfolding before Marcus's eyes. He watched Trump's face closely, looking for any sign of approval or disapproval. For what felt like an eternity, Trump said nothing. His eyes moved from one part of the building to another, his expression unreadable. Marcus's throat tightened as he waited, every second dragging on. Finally, Trump spoke. Well, he said, his voice low, but there was something almost approving in it. "This is impressive. You did it, Marcus. You actually pulled it off." The weight that had been pressing down on Marcus's chest lifted slightly, but it wasn't over yet. Trump wasn't done. "Let me be clear," Trump continued. "This project was risky, but you handled it well. It wasn't easy, and there were some close calls. But you did what needed to be done. I'm not one to hand out compliments, but you've earned this one. Consider this project a success." Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. Success. They had done it. Against all odds, despite the setbacks, the exhaustion, the doubts, they had finished the project. They had proven themselves. The workers let out a collective breath, a mix of relief and joy flooding through them. The project had been completed. They had done the impossible. But for Marcus, the real reward wasn't in the final inspection. It was in the journey they had taken together. The building, now standing tall and complete, was a testament to their strength, their resilience, and their unwavering commitment. It wasn't just about the physical structure. It was about what they had built together: trust, unity, and determination. As the investors left the site, Marcus stood in the shadow of the completed building. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the horizon. The battle was over, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax, even if just for a moment. He had done it. His team had done it. They had proven that anything was possible if you refused to give up. What do you think Marcus and his team will do now that the project is complete? Will there be more challenges ahead, or is this just the beginning? Share your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. The celebration was brief. After all the sweat, sacrifice, and sleepless nights, Marcus and his team were finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. The project was complete, and Trump had given his approval. But as the workers trickled out of the site, tired but triumphant, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Marcus lingered on the site long after the last worker had left, his thoughts racing. Despite everything they had accomplished, there was a nagging feeling that something was about to change again. And sure enough, as the night began to fall and the lights of the city flickered on in the distance, Marcus received an unexpected phone call that would alter the course of everything. It was Trump. "Marcus, you there?" Trump's voice was sharp, his tone businesslike as always. "Yes, I'm here," Marcus replied, his voice still hoarse from the hours of work. "What's going on?" Trump wasted no time. "I've got a new opportunity for you," he said, his voice crackling with the kind of energy that Marcus recognized all too well. "The project is done, but now it's time for something bigger. We're looking to expand. I need someone I can trust to lead the next phase. Are you in?" Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had expected a call about payment, maybe even a thank you, but this was different. Trump was offering him more. More responsibility, more risk, more pressure. "Tell me more," Marcus said, trying to mask the sudden mix of excitement and apprehension that bubbled up inside him. "I'm talking about a multi-billion-dollar deal," Trump continued. "We're looking to build not just one, but an entire complex. Offices, luxury apartments, a hotel, the works. And I need you to head it up. Think of this as the chance of a lifetime." The weight of Trump's words hit Marcus like a freight train. A multi-billion-dollar deal? The thought was dizzying. He had just led a team through one of the hardest projects of his life, and now Trump was asking him to step into a new challenge, one that could define his career. Marcus's mind raced. He knew this was the moment. This could be the opportunity he had been waiting for, the chance to prove himself, not just to Trump, but to everyone who had ever doubted him. He thought of the team that had stood by him, the workers who had sacrificed so much. They had built something together, and now he had the chance to lead them into something even bigger. But then, another thought crept into his mind. His family, his friends. Could he really give up everything again? The constant pressure, the never-ending grind. Was he ready to sacrifice his personal life for this? "Marcus, I need an answer," Trump pressed, snapping Marcus out of his thoughts. He glanced around the site, the building standing tall in front of him, a symbol of everything he had fought for. It felt like the culmination of a long journey, but was it really over? Was this the end of the road, or the beginning of something even bigger? Marcus took a deep breath. He had been through so much already. The challenge ahead was daunting, but it was also the kind of opportunity he couldn't afford to pass up. He knew what he had to do. "I'm in," Marcus said, his voice firm with resolve. "Let's do it." The following weeks passed in a blur. Marcus dove headfirst into the next phase of the project. He spent his days in meetings, his nights reviewing blueprints, and his weekends coordinating with new partners, contractors, and investors. The scale of the new project was staggering. Every detail needed to be perfect, every decision critical. This was no longer just about completing a building. It was about creating a legacy. As the project began to take shape, Marcus's relationship with Trump grew even more intense. Trump was a master of high-stakes negotiation, and Marcus found himself learning quickly, adapting to the fast pace and ruthless demands of the business world. There were moments when Marcus felt out of his depth, but he never let it show. He was driven by the same fire that had gotten him through the toughest days on the construction site. But as the pressure mounted, Marcus found himself pulled in multiple directions. His time at the job site became more demanding, and his personal life began to suffer. He missed birthdays, skipped family dinners, and barely had time to catch up with old friends. The constant calls, emails, and meetings left him little room to breathe. His wife, Clara, noticed the change. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the strain in his voice. "Marcus," she said one evening as they sat down for dinner, the only time they had together that week, "I get that this project is important, but where does that leave us? You've been gone for days, and when you are home, you're not really here. We can't keep doing this." Her words hit him hard. He had promised her that things would get better, but they were only getting worse. It wasn't just the work. It was the distance it was creating between them. He had always been the kind of person who threw himself into his work, but now it was starting to feel like he was losing everything else in the process. As the days passed, Marcus tried to balance the ever-growing demands of the project with his family life, but it wasn't easy. The strain between his personal and professional life was reaching a breaking point. The new project was a success, but at what cost? With the project well on its way, Marcus was forced to confront the bigger question. What was the true cost of success? Would all of this be worth it if he ended up sacrificing everything he cared about along the way? The road ahead was uncertain. He had come so far, but now he had to decide what mattered most. Was it the building, the project, the money, or was it the relationships, the people, and the life he had once fought so hard to protect? It was 3 a.m. when Marcus finally returned home after another grueling day at the construction site. His body ached from the constant tension of meetings, decisions, and overseeing the project. The building was slowly taking shape, but with each new level completed, the pressure to finish on time and within budget seemed to mount. As he opened the door, the house was eerily quiet. The lights were off except for the soft glow from the kitchen, where Clara was sitting at the table, her laptop open but her attention focused on the coffee cup in her hands. "Clara?" Marcus called out, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but sharp. There was no mistaking the look on her face: concern, frustration, and something else Marcus couldn't quite place. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said quietly, but there was an urgency in her tone that made him pause. He dropped his keys into the bowl by the door and walked over to her, standing still for a moment, trying to find the right words. He had been avoiding this conversation for weeks now. His work had consumed him, and he knew he hadn't been present in their relationship. But now, seeing her sitting there, so distant yet so close, he realized just how much he had neglected the most important person in his life. "Clara, I know it's been a lot. I'm doing this for us, for our future," he said, though even he could hear the hollow sound of his words. They felt rehearsed, as if he had been trying to convince himself more than her. She shook her head, her expression unreadable. "Is it really for us, Marcus? Or is it just for you? You've been so focused on this project, on impressing Trump, on being someone in the business world. And I've been here, alone. You promised me things would get better, but instead, you've become a stranger to me." The words stung, more than he expected. He had known this was coming. Clara had always been patient, understanding even when the hours at work dragged on, when deadlines loomed large, and when the weight of the project threatened to crush him. But she had reached her limit. "I've been trying to make something of myself," Marcus began. But Clara cut him off, her voice firm but tinged with pain. "I know you have, but at what cost? I don't even remember the last time we had a real conversation. The last time we laughed together or shared a moment that wasn't about the project or the next deal. Marcus, you're losing yourself. And I'm losing you." Her words hit him like a ton of bricks, and for the first time in weeks, Marcus didn't have a ready answer. The truth was, he had been consumed by the project. The allure of success, the drive to prove himself to Trump, to the investors, and to everyone who had ever doubted him, had taken precedence over everything else. But now, standing here, hearing Clara's voice break, he realized how much he had lost in the process. "I don't know what to do anymore, Marcus," she whispered. "I don't know if I can keep waiting for you to come back. I don't even know if you want to come back." The next few days passed in a blur. Marcus tried to focus on the project, but Clara's words echoed in his mind, growing louder with each passing hour. Every meeting, every call with Trump, every update from his team felt increasingly distant, disconnected from the person he had once been. Clara had gone to visit her parents for a few days, needing space, and Marcus couldn't blame her. He had seen the distance growing between them, the quiet tension that had been building for months. He knew he had pushed her too far, but he wasn't sure if there was a way to fix it. One evening, as he sat in his office, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop, he received a message from Trump. The deal was moving forward, and the stakes had never been higher. Trump's message was blunt. As always, the investors are getting impatient. "We need results, and we need them now." Marcus typed a quick response, confirming the progress, but inside, he felt a growing pit in his stomach. For all the external successes, everything felt hollow. What was the point of all this if he had no one to share it with? What was the point of success if it came at the expense of everything he truly cared about? As he closed his laptop, the weight of the decision he had been avoiding finally hit him. He couldn't keep living like this. He couldn't keep pretending that his career, his ambition, was all that mattered. He had built something incredible, yes, but he had also torn down the very foundation that had supported him. Clara was right. He was losing himself in this race for success, and he had lost sight of what truly mattered. The next morning, Marcus drove to Clara's parents' house. He didn't know if she would want to see him, but he had to try. He had to make things right, even if it meant stepping away from everything he had worked so hard to achieve. Clara was sitting on the porch when he arrived, a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked up as he walked toward her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was so much left unsaid between them, but in that silence, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a way back. "Clara," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "I've messed up. I've been so focused on the future that I forgot to take care of what really matters. You matter. Our life together matters. I can't keep chasing this idea of success if it means losing everything else." Clara didn't say anything at first, just studied him with quiet eyes. Then, slowly, she set the cup down and stood up, walking toward him. "I've been waiting for you to realize that," she said quietly. "But it's not just about words. It's about actions. Can you change, Marcus? Can you find a way to balance this life you've built with the life you have here?" Marcus nodded, his heart pounding. "I can. I will. I'll prove it to you. I don't want to lose you." As they embraced, Marcus felt the weight of his decision settle over him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be sacrifices, and he couldn't erase the damage he had caused overnight. But he was ready to fight for the one thing that truly mattered, his family. His career, his ambition, would still be there. But now he understood that it could never come at the cost of his happiness. The days following Marcus's heart-to-heart with Clara were filled with both challenges and small victories. He had made the decision to prioritize what mattered most, but the reality of shifting his focus wasn't as easy as it seemed. The project was still moving forward, but he was learning, step by step, to manage his time and balance his personal and professional lives. Clara had agreed to give him another chance, but things between them weren't instantly perfect. Trust had been damaged, and it would take time to rebuild. Yet, there was a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. A renewed understanding that they were in this together, and that together, they could face whatever challenges came their way. Marcus started by scaling back his hours. It was a difficult adjustment, especially when he was so accustomed to the constant pressure of the job, but he knew it was necessary. Trump's project was still demanding, but Marcus had learned to delegate. He trusted his team more than ever, and he made sure to involve them in decision-making, empowering them to take ownership of their roles. This allowed him to step back without the project losing momentum. During this time, Marcus also reconnected with the things he had neglected: his friends, his family, and his own well-being. He made it a point to spend weekends with Clara, rediscovering the simple joy of being together. They went on walks, had dinners without interruptions, and even took short weekend trips. Slowly but surely, the bond that had frayed began to repair, thread by thread. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Clara turned to Marcus, her eyes soft but serious. "How do you feel about everything now?" she asked. Marcus paused, thinking. "I feel like I've been given a second chance, not just with you, but with myself. I've spent so much time chasing something that I thought would define me, but now I realize it's the people who do. The relationships we build, the love we share, that's what matters most." Clara smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "It's going to take time, Marcus, but I'm willing to work on it. We have to rebuild, not just your career, but us." He nodded, understanding fully now what that meant. He had to be patient, not just with Clara, but with himself. They were both learning a new way of being together, one that would require effort, compromise, and vulnerability. Meanwhile, Trump had continued to push for results on the project, but Marcus was no longer feeling the same frantic urgency. He communicated with Trump more openly about his limitations, making it clear that he would not sacrifice his personal life for the sake of success. Trump, surprisingly, was more understanding than Marcus had anticipated. While Trump had always been driven and demanding, he also valued loyalty and understood Marcus's need for balance. "I get it," Trump said during one of their calls. "You've got to take care of your personal life if you want to keep your head in the game. Just don't forget why you're here, Marcus. We're in this for the long haul." Marcus appreciated the rare moment of understanding from Trump. It felt like a validation of the changes he was trying to make. He had been so afraid that stepping back would be seen as weakness, but instead, it seemed to earn him a new level of respect. As weeks turned into months, Marcus's new approach to life began to show results. The project, which had once felt like an all-consuming beast, was on track and thriving under his leadership. He had learned how to strike a balance, his business acumen sharpened by experience, but his personal life now a steady anchor. Clara noticed the change in him as well. She saw the way he was more present, more engaged in their relationship. There were still moments of tension, but the understanding between them was growing stronger each day. Their communication was better, and so was their trust. One afternoon, as they were having lunch together, Clara brought up an idea that had been on her mind. "Marcus," she began, "I've been thinking. You've worked so hard to get to where you are, but what's next for us? What's our vision for the future as a family?" Marcus looked at her, intrigued by the question. It was the first time she had asked about their future in such a direct way, and he realized that he had been so focused on surviving the present that he hadn't really thought about what was next. "You know," he said slowly, "I've spent so much of my life looking ahead, chasing the next big thing. But maybe now it's time to slow down and focus on what we really want together. I've never thought about the future in the same way. I've been so focused on career goals, but I think now it's time to make our personal goals just as important." Clara smiled. "I like the sound of that." Marcus paused, taking her hand across the table. "Maybe it's time for us to start planning for the next chapter, not just in business, but in life. Maybe we take a step back from the big, high-stakes projects and find something that brings us joy, something we can build together." Clara's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He wasn't sure what that future would look like, but he knew it would be shaped by the choices they made together. Marcus still had big ambitions, and the projects with Trump were still ongoing. But he was no longer driven by the need to prove himself or by a desire for status. Instead, he was driven by the understanding that success wasn't just about accolades or financial gain. It was about the relationships he nurtured and the life he built. As the months passed, Marcus continued to balance his work with his personal life, and the project with Trump reached its successful conclusion. The building, now a towering symbol of their hard work, stood proudly in the city skyline. But the real success, Marcus realized, wasn't in the bricks and steel. It was in the relationships he had rebuilt and the life he had reclaimed. Clara stood beside him as they looked out over the city from the rooftop of the newly completed building. She had been with him every step of the way, and now they stood together, facing the future with a shared vision. "This is just the beginning, Marcus," she said, her voice full of hope. He nodded, feeling a new sense of clarity. "Yes, it is. And this time, I'm ready for it." The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Marcus's office, casting long shadows across the polished floor. He sat behind his desk, tapping his pen thoughtfully, his mind far from the reports in front of him. It had been a year since everything had shifted. The year he had reevaluated his life, his priorities, and his ambitions. Looking out at the skyline, with the towering building they had completed now a symbol of their success, Marcus couldn't help but feel both a sense of pride and a quiet uncertainty. Despite the success of the project and the positive changes in his personal life, there was still a nagging feeling deep inside him. Clara had noticed it too. While they had become stronger as a couple, with their relationship rebuilt on the foundation of trust, mutual respect, and shared goals, something still felt incomplete. The world outside of their cozy home in the city was waiting. Opportunities were endless, and Trump's business network had only grown stronger. But Marcus had to ask himself, what was the cost of more success? Was the relentless pursuit of greatness worth it? Or would he find himself back where he had started, torn between the demands of work and the life he had always wanted? It was the weekend, and Marcus and Clara were sitting on the back porch of their house, a cup of coffee in hand, the city skyline visible in the distance. The peaceful scene felt almost surreal after the chaos of the past. The sun warmed the cool morning air, and birds chirped softly in the background. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, each absorbed in their thoughts. Clara broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "Marcus, what do you see for us in the future? We've come so far, but I can see how much is still weighing on you. You've changed, but are you truly happy with how things are now?" Her question was direct, but it wasn't an accusation. She had seen the change in him over the last year. But there were still moments when Marcus would slip into his old mindset. He would get lost in thought, or spend too many hours working, lost in his ambition. She could tell he wasn't fully at peace. Marcus took a deep breath, his gaze shifting from the skyline to Clara's face. He had always admired her ability to ask the tough questions, questions that made him reflect on what truly mattered. I think I've been chasing something, Clara. I thought if I reached a certain level, if I accomplished all these big things, I'd feel fulfilled. But the closer I get to the finish line, the more I realize that it's not the destination that matters, it's the journey. And I've been so focused on winning that I forgot to enjoy the moments that matter most. Clara's eyes softened as she listened. "And what about us, Marcus? I've been with you through this journey, and I've seen the cost. I need to know if you're truly committed to us, to this life we've built. I don't want to be just a part of your story. I want to be the story. And I think you need to decide if we're your priority now." Marcus felt a knot in his stomach. Her words were both simple and profound. Clara had always been his anchor, but for so long, he had let his ambition take him away from the one thing that truly mattered. Now, he had to make a choice. That night, Marcus found himself sitting alone in the living room, staring out at the city lights. The world seemed so vast, so full of possibilities. He could feel the pull of his old ambition, the urge to keep climbing, to chase bigger deals, more success, more recognition. But deep down, he knew that path had already cost him more than he was willing to lose. Clara had been patient, understanding, and supportive through it all. She had walked beside him, through the highs and the lows, but she couldn't be the only one making the effort. It had to come from him now. He couldn't keep pretending that career success alone would define him. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from Trump. "The next deal is even bigger, Marcus. Let's talk tomorrow. The investors are excited." Marcus stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. A part of him wanted to dive right in, chase the next big opportunity. But another part of him, the part that had grown over the past year, the part that knew Clara's love was his true anchor, told him that maybe it was time to step away from the pressure, from the constant chase. The following morning, Marcus made a decision. He sat down with Clara over breakfast, the air between them heavy with anticipation. He had already made the call, and he needed her to understand why he had chosen this path. Clara, I've thought a lot about what we've talked about the future, and I've made a decision. I'm going to step away from the project with Trump. I'm not going to chase any more big deals. I've had enough of the endless race. What I really want is to build a life with you. A life where we have time for each other, for the things that matter. I want to be the man you deserve, not the man I thought I had to be. Clara's eyes filled with emotion, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, she reached across the table and took his hand in hers. I'm so proud of you, Marcus. You don't know how much this means to me. I've always known the man you are beneath all the ambition. This is the man I've always loved. Marcus smiled, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing anything. He wasn't running toward some abstract goal or distant prize. He was right where he needed to be. As the months passed, Marcus and Clara began to redefine their future, building it together. They traveled more, reconnected with old friends, and began to invest time in causes they both cared about. The life they built wasn't one of extravagant wealth or corporate power, but it was one of genuine connection, shared experiences, and love. Marcus still had the skills, the experience, and the drive to succeed in business. But now, those traits were tempered with a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. He had learned the hard way that success without balance, without love and connection, was ultimately empty. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara turned to him, a soft smile on her face. You know, I think this might just be the best chapter of our story. Marcus chuckled, squeezing her hand. I think you're right. And the best part? We're writing it together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat in comfortable silence, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. What do you think will come next for Marcus and Clara? How will their decision impact their lives moving forward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.